There are wrong ways to invest. A 100% portfolio allocation to any yield max single stock covered call ETF comes to mind, but there is not necessarily a single best way to invest, only a best way that works for you. So, today I'm going to walk you through my investing strategy and how I decided to allocate my portfolio. My hope is in doing that, you can think more deliberately about your own strategy or potentially leave a comment to provide a take for the community. So hit that subscribe button and join me today for my portfolio premiere, Act 1, which is all about strategy and asset allocation right here in the red zone. Let's start out today asking why. Why are we investing and what is our strategic goal? Mine is to retire earlier than a traditional retirement age and provide a legacy to our kids when they can benefit the most from it rather than much later when I'm gone. How I intend to do that is through investing primarily in a diversified portfolio of equities and debt. Now, because I exhibit all the flaws of what it means to be human, I use systems like automatic investing to provide the discipline required to keep going over decades, and also realize that no matter how much data you look at that tells you otherwise, picturing yourself doing something uncomfortable like selling stocks when the market is crashing because you need to go grocery shopping is not a position I want to be in going forward. Now, even if I didn't desire to retire early, I should probably plan to do so, as the average age of retirement in the US is around 62, with the expectation of workers averaging around 65. So, something is happening that is causing people to retire early, which could be negative, like health concerns or layoffs, or maybe possibly their portfolios are larger than expected. Either way, I've seen far too many people laid off where I work, and the newer folks that are hired generally are younger, unless they're occupying the C suite. In other words, you may not have an interest in early retirement, but early retirement may have an interest in you. A final consideration for me is I am in what is referred to as the red zone, which is that time period just before and after retirement where a bear market has an outsized impact on your outcomes due to sequence of return risk. Even if you aren't selling down assets in the pre retirement part of the red zone, a bad last decade can significantly impact the size of your starting portfolio in retirement and therefore how much you can safely withdraw under a traditional retirement decumulation type strategy. So, I'm personally not interested in having to rely on selling down assets to dictate when I can retire and how much I can spend. It doesn't mean I'll never sell, it just means that I don't want to have to do so because I need some gas money. Now, given my less than 10-year to retirement time horizon, coupled with the desire for spending income that feels free, it's not, as we know from basic dividend theory, that psychologically dividends feel more spendable, but this is a portfolio construction with the associated strategies that I believe will get me to meet my income goals and mitigate risk throughout a hopefully long retirement. So let's start here with cash allocation. This consists of an emergency fund, a portion that can handle a large known cost with unclear timing, but likely in the next few years, such as I'll probably need a new car or a new appliance. Also, upfront retirement spending splurges, such as the first vacation, and finally, a portion that can cover living expenses for a period of about 2 years. Add that up, and it comes to about 10% of my portfolio, which is in a high yield savings account and a money market account. Holding cash just above an emergency fund helps mitigate both sequence risk and dividend cuts in early retirement. Next, I have a bond allocation. The purpose of this allocation is to provide income in the first part of retirement if I experience dividend cuts. The income comes in when the bonds mature as they're laddered and I shouldn't have to sell them. If I don't experience any dividend cuts, I can still spend it anyway or reinvest in other bonds using a ladder approach, including treasuries or munis, so that every year there is always something maturing that I could spend. The 10% allocation is first, more of what I feel comfortable with, and second, could cover up to a 15% dividend cut. But it's not based off extensive research. For example, like the research done to validate the 4% rule, which backtested safe withdrawal rates on a stock to bond allocation of 50% stocks, 50% bonds. But my total 20% allocation to basic safety in the form of cash and bonds is the amount that I'm comfortable with when I don't plan to generate income by selling. The next portion of my portfolio is growth, and I allocated 20% of my portfolio to that strategy. The goal here is to not have to touch this portion until the projected second half of retirement. Its job is in the name, to grow, so that over the long term, I keep up with inflation, not just CPI inflation, but also healthcare inflation, which has generally run much hotter than the CPI. The next portion of my portfolio is dividend growth, which I've allocated 20% of my portfolio to. The point of this part of the portfolio is to take the dividends as income and also that the dividends are growing at least the rate of inflation, so the purchasing power of those dividends is retained over the long term. The final portion of my portfolio, 40%, is dedicated to an income investing strategy. The point of this part of the portfolio is to pay me now. Now defined as when I actually retire, and until then, reinvest to grow the payout. I don't really have an expectation that the income provided by this part of the portfolio will grow to keep up with inflation unless I'm able to periodically reinvest some of the income that these assets are paying out. Another option for a lot of soon to be retirees would be to just purchase an annuity. Those really aren't for me at present for a lot of reasons that are beyond the scope of my portfolio premiere because I don't have any of them. So, how did I get to these allocations? For the cash, as I said, it was about the 2 years and 3 months of living expenses, as well as the run of the mill car. And it happened to come to about 10% of my current portfolio value. For bonds, it was about covering a 15% dividend cut in the first 5 years of retirement that happened to also come out to 10%. For the income portion, it was about how much income I need annually when added to my pension, assuming it paid roughly 8%. That came out to about 40%. For the dividend growth portion, that 20% allocation came about from a sense of how much additional income I would need in my 60s prior to claiming Social Security, obviously prior to Medicare. And from a growth perspective, that was really default left over, but I also took a look at back testing and how much income I would need if I experienced a bad 1970s style inflation and overall longevity risk, particularly longevity risk for my spouse, with that longevity risk magnified as a sole household. Now, I didn't cover my 401k here, as first, the balance is pretty small. Had I included it, it only represents about 5% of my overall portfolio. Why so small is that I didn't have access to that investment vehicle until very recently in my career, but it's not all bad news, as the first part of my career resulted in a small lifetime pension instead of a large 401k balance. It's a target date fund because the investing options at my workplace 401k are terrible, and I'll either keep my 401k now and sell it early in retirement to take as income, or if I have room, I'll roll it over to an IRA and actually invest in what I think is a better strategy for me. I don't need to make that decision today, so I won't. So, why are you investing? What is your strategy and how do you allocate your investments to fulfill it? In our next episode, I'll walk through the actual investments in my portfolio that I believe, as demonstrated by my allocation of dollars to these investments, will accomplish my goal and fit into my strategy. To tide you over until next week, check out this video with some tactics on how I am phasing my retirement income to retire early. Until then, I'll see you next time, right here in the red zone.